Alright guys, we're going to be looking at the Unit 2 study guide again. We're going to be looking at the angle relationships part of the assessment. Now, when it comes to angle relationships, there's a couple things we have to keep in mind. First, we have a linear pair, and a linear pair is two lines, or two angles next to each other along a straight line. We know that these add up to 180. We also have vertical angles, and keep in mind vertical angles mean they're across the vertex from each other. So my circles are congruent and my squares are congruent. And keep in mind, congruent just means that they are equal to each other. We also have complementary, which means we have angles that add up to 90 degrees, and we have supplementary, which is angles that add up to 180 degrees. And those are our major angle types that we're going to be looking at. Now, a little vocab to start off. We want to know which of the following names a ray. Now, keep in mind with a ray, it starts at a point and it continues in the opposite direction. Think of a sun's ray. It starts at the sun and it ends when it keeps going down to Earth, down to the other planets, depending on what they see. So, if we look here, CB, well, C starts at the arrow, so CB cannot be the answer. A also starts at the arrow, so that can't be it. BC, B starts at the vertex and goes to the arrow. So BC is a ray. If I look at DM, one's a capital letter and one's my lowercase letter. So those are not going to work. You cannot group them together in a name. Now we want to name line M. Well, if I look at line M, we have to use the points that are on the line. We have A, B, and D. But keep in mind, if I want to name the whole line, I need to start and stop at the first point and the last point. So in this case, letter A, AD is the first point on our line, and D is the last point on our line. Which two different angles share vertex B? Now there is a typo. Letter D should have a C on the end of it. If we look at letter A, we have angle ABC and angle B. Well, ABC has a vertex of B because our vertex is our middle point. But angle B, we don't know which side it's talking about, so we can't assume that they do. If we look at letter B, CAB, well, if I follow from C to A to B, that doesn't even make an angle that's on my line. So because of that alone, that does not work. If I look at CBA, well, CBA works, but ABC, these are exactly the same angles. So it's not two different angles. ABC and DBC are my two angles that share my vertex of B. And vertex is just the point, so they both have to have point B as their angle. Now, when it comes to solving, you need to determine what type of angles you're solving first. And then once you solve it, you need to make sure that you answer the question correctly. If it says solve for X and you solve for X, you're done. But if it asks for an angle and you only solve for X, you need to continue solving. If we look at these two angles are vertical angles. They're across a vertex from one another. And we know vertical angles are congruent or they equal each other. So I'm going to set both of them equal to each other. If I use my math and algebra, and you can solve it in Desmos if you prefer, we're going to get x is equal to 17. Now, one way to check yourself, and I want you guys to check yourself as you go through. It doesn't take a whole lot of extra time. If I plug 17 back in here, so 5 times 17 plus 11. If we do that, we get 96 degrees. On the other side, I'm going to plug 17 in. And again, I'm going to get 96 degrees. And that's important because vertical angles are congruent. When you plug your x value back in, you need to make sure they are congruent. That worked. So we know that our value of x is 17. And so your answer is 17 since it didn't ask you to solve for any additional angles. If we look at our second problem, given the diagram below, find the measure of ABD. Well, first things first, we have to decide what type of angles they are. They're not vertical because they're not across a vertex from each other, but it is a straight line. This is going to be our linear pair. They're along a straight line, and it's two angles next to each other, so they add up to 180 degrees. So I'm going to take 6x plus 5 plus 4x plus 15 equals 180. So 10x plus 20 equals 180. And x is going to equal 16. Now, here's the important thing you need to keep in mind. We need to plug these numbers back in because the original question asks us the measure of ABD. So, angle ABD is equal to 6x plus 5. So I'm going to take 6 times 16 plus 5. So 96 plus 5 gives me 101 degrees. So the measure of angle ABD is 101. Please keep in mind when you are doing this, please make sure you go back and read that problem, because had you put 16 in as your answer, even though you solved your equation correctly, it's not the answer to the question that you're being asked. So make sure you do go back and read that. Alright, if the measure of angle PQT is equal to 3x plus 47 and the measure of angle SQR is equal to 6x minus 25, find the measure of SQR. The big thing with these, I want you to draw the picture and I want you to fill in what you know. Do not just do this in your head, because then if you picture it wrong, you're going to end up solving it wrong. And if you solve it wrong, well, we all know then your answer is wrong. So PQT is equal to 3x plus 47. SQR is equal to 6x minus 25. Now, from here, we need to keep in mind, if we label our angle type, these are vertical angles. And we know vertical angles equal each other. So I'm going to say 6x minus 25 equals 3x plus 47. Again, use your algebra skills or use Desmos to solve this. You're going to come up with x is equal to 24. But again, keep in mind, you need to make sure you're looking at the question carefully, because the question does not ask us for x. It asks us for the measure of SQR. SQR is equal to 6x minus 25, so I'm just going to plug 24 back in for the x, and SQR is equal to 119 degrees. Now again, to be able to check yourself, if they're vertical angles, the top should also be equal to 119. So if I plug 24 in for 3x plus 47, that should also equal 119. And when it does, now you know you're correct in solving your problem. But make sure, again, you're paying attention to what type of angles they are, and you're paying attention to what the question asks, whether you stop at x and you found your answer, or whether you need to keep solving. Angle S and angle R and angle S are complementary. If the measure of angle R is 12x minus 3 and the measure of angle S is 7x minus 2, find the measure of angle R. Now, this is where vocab is super important. We need to make sure we have that vocab down, because here we have complementary. Keep in mind, complementary adds to equal 90 degrees. So that tells me R plus S equals 90. So now I'm going to substitute what I know in. R is 12x minus 3 plus S is 7x minus 2. And we're going to set that equal to 90. Well, We're going to use our algebra skills, combine our like terms, properties of equality, and solve for x. And x is going to equal 5. But again, go back and reread the problem. Make sure you understand what the problem is asking. In this case, it's asking for angle R. So the measure of angle R is 12x minus 3. So I need to plug 5 in for x, and I'm going to find out the measure of angle R is equal to 57 degrees. 57 degrees. Again, make sure you know your vocab and make sure you're plugging your answers back in. Now, P and Q are supplementary angles. Again, strong vocab word, but we know that supplementary adds to 180. So, if the measure of angle P is 4x plus 1 and the measure of angle Q is 9x minus 3, find the measure of angle Q. Okay, well that tells me P plus Q is equal to 180 by the supplementary. So now we're going to take that and we're going to plug in what we know. 4x plus 1 plus 9x minus 3 equals 180. Again, use your algebra skills. X is going to equal 14. But again, we're not going to stop there. We need to go back and reread the problem to see if that's as far as I was solving or if I needed to solve it farther. In this case, it's saying find the measure of angle Q. So I'm going to take my x and I'm going to plug it in for angle Q, which is 9x minus 3. So 9 times 14 minus 3. So the measure of angle Q is equal to 123 degrees. Again, please don't let the reason you get this problem wrong be because you did not read the problem carefully. If you put 14 in, you're going to be incorrect, and not because you set up the equation wrong, not because you solved the equation wrong, but because you did not read the question that you were solving for Q and not X. Our last problem, we need to find the value of X. Now, if we look at that, we do have a lot of straight lines, which is awesome, except we don't know what the values are, and you cannot assume what the values are. Just because it looks like 67, unless it is a vertical angle from 67, you cannot assume that any of the rest of them are. So, if we look, I don't have any straight lines that add up to 180 with all their values, but 67 and 2x plus 1 are vertical from each other. They are across the vertex. So, if they are vertical angles, we know that they are equal to each other. So 67 equals 2x plus 1. Again, use your algebra skills. X is going to equal 33. Now, to double check that we are correct, we're going to take this and we're going to plug it back in. So 2 times 33 plus 1. Well, this gives us 67 degrees, which is what we want, because if they are vertical angles, they should be congruent to each other. In this case, stopping at x, we're good to go. X is 33 is our final answer, because it's not asking for anything else. But make sure you're reading these questions carefully so you know exactly what to look for and exactly what to solve for. Please let me know about any questions you have before you start taking the test. I will gladly help you. But once you start, I cannot help, so make sure you ask ahead of time.